Hello and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Podcast. My name is Dr. Nickers and I'm running the show here at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Today we were talking about the forearm rotation test, the wrist hinge test, and the wrist flexion test. We are looking at the wrist and the forearm in the golf swing. This is a golf podcast episode. So again, this week we are discussing TPI's test for the wrist and forearm. There are three of them. We're looking at forearm rotation or supination and pronation of the wrist. We're looking at wrist hinge, which is an ulnar deviation or a radial deviation. Pretty much think of it as hinging the wrist towards the thumb side or hinging the wrist towards the pinky side. And then a wrist flexion test, which again, think of it as pointing the knuckles towards the ground or pointing the knuckles up towards the sky. So that is what we are going to look at today. Let's get started. So this will be a relatively quick podcast. I'll just walk through some of the things that we're looking for and then show some videos of the actual test happening. So first, the forearm rotation test. This is a supination and pronation test of the wrist. Pronation, think of it as if your elbows are tucked in towards your side and your palms are out towards the ground. Think of that as a pronated wrist. If you take your palms and you rotate, keeping your elbows tucked in at your rib cage, and you rotate so your palms are up towards the ceiling, that is a supinated wrist. So then we go back down to palms down, that's a pronated wrist. So we'll start with our thumbs neutral, pointing towards the ceiling. Then we'll point or kind of face our palm towards the ground. That's a pronated position. We're looking for 80 degrees of pronation. So we're basically just looking to see, can we get our palm parallel to the ground? And then we just go back to neutral, thumbs pointing towards the ceiling, and then we're going to rotate our wrist palm pointing towards the ceiling. If we can get it towards the ceiling, again, we're looking for about 80 degrees, which is basically parallel to the ceiling. If we get both those on both hands, then we're good. Otherwise, we're going to have to take a closer look at what is happening at the carpals as well as the bones of the forearm. So the radius and the ulna, how well are they moving proximally, so at the elbow itself, and then how well are they moving distally, which is down where they connect at the wrist. We also need to look at the carpal bones within the wrist, the two rows of the carpal bones, and make sure that, or take a look and see if they're sliding and gliding properly, and if maybe some chiropractic adjustments at the elbow or the wrist could be useful at starting the process of getting that mobility back in. Then we can talk about strength and actually working to actively achieve those positions and where that might be lacking as well. So that is the forearm rotation test. Let's take a look at a video of where that's important. Now for the wrist rotation test, we're going to have the camera be face on. We're going to tuck our elbows into our side. We'll start palms down, and then we'll twist to palms up. And we'll do the same thing, twisting as far as we can, palms down, palms up. Good. Great there. All right, and so where does forearm rotation occur, or wrist supination and pronation in the golf swing? Again, most of this is going to be in the top of the backswing, where we're getting the most mobility requirements. Right, so we need the backside arm to be able to supinate in the backswing, and then we need pronation of the same backside arm into the downswing and into the follow-through. So we're starting in a supinated position at the top of the backswing, and then it moves through a pronation motion into a fully pronated position into the follow-through, and the exact opposite is required from the lead side arm. If we now move into the wrist hinge test, this is important. Again, we see it in the top of the backswing and through the contact point where we need to move from a radial deviated wrist in both cases, in both wrists, into an ulnar deviated kind of chop like motion there of the wrist. We just need to have access to that motion. What it is we need about 30 degrees of ulnar deviation, right? So pinky towards forearm in that kind of hinge, and then 20 degrees of radial deviation is what we are expecting. Again, the requirements here, they're important that we at least see in a not so golf way. What do we have access to? But it's really going to come down to sequencing and getting these things, doing the right things at the right time to really improve that contact timing and things like that. But the prerequisite is just making sure we have access to the motion in the first place. Otherwise, you're going to be spinning your wheels. Once we can see that you have the right mobility in there, then again, things like drills become more useful because we know that you're not having to compensate because of wrist mobility issues. So this is always step number one. We see it again in the backswing. We need radial deviation, ulnar deviation as we go and move down into the downswing and follow through. Let's take a look at a video that shows this test, and you can do it at home. Okay, for the wrist hinge test, we're going to go palms towards the ceiling, cameras towards our side, and then what we'll do is make a fist from that position. And I want you to go pinky towards your wrist, so we're hinging our wrist down like this. Go ahead, Nick. Hold that for a second, and then I want to do the opposite. We're going thumb back up towards our wrist. Good there. All right, last we have the wrist flexion and extension test. Here we're looking for 60 degrees of flexion, 60 degrees of extension from neutral. Think of this as ribs tucked in, palms facing towards the ground, and then you're just going to bend that wrist downward, and then go back to neutral, palm towards the ground, and then we're going to bend that wrist towards the ceiling, right, palm towards the ceiling. That is extension. So looking for 60 degrees in either way. Again, top of the backswing is where we're getting most of our extension requirements. And then as we move into the follow through, we're moving through a flexion motion into contact and into that follow through. Really, in reality, we are getting a combination of all of these movements, but we want to make sure that we have full access to it, pure 60 degrees of wrist flexion and 60 degrees of wrist extension. Let's take a look at the video showing us how we can walk through this test at home and what to look for. So the camera is going to be towards our side here. What we're going to do is measure our wrist flexion and extension, and then we're going to measure our wrist hinge. So we'll start with our palm facing the ground. We make a fist, and from here, I want to see how far you can flex down and flex up. It's important to keep our elbows to our sides here, up and down, and I want to see that same thing through here like that. So Nick, go ahead. Good. And then into extension. Great. And then you can flip. Let's see the same thing on the left wrist. Okay, so to conclude, wrist and forearm motion in the golf swing really is a triplanar experience or activity. We are using, we're never just using one thing. We're never just in wrist extension and then just in wrist, maybe radial deviation and supination, right? In reality, we're doing a combination of movements in all three planes. Some sort of combination with varying degrees of mobility needed from each. So it's going to be a quite complex joint region to work with in the swing, but that's golf, right? So first thing is just making sure we have access to all of these mobility ranges individually, and then we know we're good. We can work on timing, sequence, and strengthening, things like that for rehab purposes or for performance purposes. After that, we can we go to the swing coach and make sure that everything's dialed in, whether they work on your wrist specifically, grip strength, or how maybe the grip itself, or how hard you're squeezing the club, things like that. But we just need to make sure that when they're asking you to do things that you are able to do them without creating compensations elsewhere, and it's not super difficult, that nothing can come from it, right? So if you're at home doing these tests, checking them out, and have any pain with any of these motions, or you're noticing missing mobility in any of these motions or more than one, definitely reach out. Integrated Rehab and Performance Center is the website, integrated@rpc.com, and you can find the email, phone number, everything on there, and some of the stuff will be in the description as well. Feel free to reach out, whether you're in the Nashville area or not. We do have some plans for people that are not in the area, where we can make things work for them and get the results we're looking for. So again, thanks for listening to the podcast. This is everything wrist and forearm mobility testing. If you have any of these issues, feel free to reach out and we'll get a plan for you. We'll take a look at everything there is to look at, not just wrist and forearms, and we will get you moving better and feeling better. So thanks for listening. Bye.